Today on Bible Conversations, we're going to be talking about where do you see yourself in 5 years? Welcome back to another episode of Bible Conversations. Before we actually get started today, I want to encourage you. Go back and listen to some episodes you may have missed in the past. We have got so many in our backlog, so many episodes that we've done. I think we're getting close to 170 now. It is really incredible what we've been able to work on, what we've been blessed by the congregation here at Keller to produce this type of material and content for y'all's study, for y'all's encouragement, but also for y'all to take this and start your own conversations. It's been really fun, really exciting. We're really closing in on 2 years now. So this is incredible. But anyways, I want to encourage you over these past 2 years, go back and listen to some episodes that you may have missed in the past. Find one that looks interesting to you and leave us a comment. Send us an email with your thoughts about it and also any requests that you may have in the future. All right, so now that I got that little plug out of the way, I want to ask you, where do you see yourself in 5 years? So, Chris.
Are you asking me?
Yeah, I'm asking you.
Okay,
Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
I see myself still at Keller, working with the missions and evangelism aspect of it, as well as the education. I see myself possibly with one child, maybe two, but probably just one. We're waiting a little bit, but I think 5 years from now, our goal is going to be to have at least one. But most importantly, I see myself just serving the Lord in whatever capacity or way that I can. Over the last 8 or 9 years, I have come to the realization that there is not a whole lot aside from serving the Lord that's really worth my time. And, there's things that I need to do for me to, decompress or to do whatever, and that may be just sitting on the couch and relaxing with my wife. But, and I think that's worthwhile, and that's not technically serving the Lord, right? But, but there's not a whole lot in my life that I can do that's really worthwhile. There's a lot of things I can do that are a waste of time, that don't benefit me, that don't benefit anybody else, that may be fun to do and will take up some of my time, because I don't think our life has to consist of 24/7 work. Yep. But I do think that I need to work on serving the Lord more efficiently, more effectively, and more wholeheartedly.
Yeah. Well, if you were to ask me 5 years ago, where do you see yourself in 5 years? What are we in, 2022 now? So
we are.
It was the spring of 2017.
You were still in high school.
Finishing my freshman year of college.
Oh, okay. That's right. You're getting old now.
Yeah. And I was about to – I had plans to come to Keller Church of Christ to intern during the summer of 2017.
Yeah.
And if you'd asked me 5 years from now, where do you see yourself? Man, I would not have imagined what has happened in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
I went from meeting my wife that summer to graduating the semester early from college so I could get married to that little lady that I love, to right after we got married, living through a pandemic for the past 2 years.
Yeah.
A year into that pandemic, the building at the congregation that I now work at, that my wife grew up at, that I interned at a few years previously, that building flooded, and we've had to completely alter our plans for everything over this past year or so.
Yeah.
And now we're closing in on 2 years of this podcast in which we have reached over, 70 different countries, over 1,300 different cities. It is incredible. If you had asked me 5 years ago, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I wouldn't have imagined any of this.
Yeah.
If you'd asked me, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I would have said, maybe I graduated college and started at a smaller congregation with about 50 members, like a lot of Bible majors do right out of college, because a lot of larger congregations don't want to hire a kid right out of college because they're unsure of them. I would have thought that I would be, kind of still warming up to the ministry, but I have dove in head first
Yeah.
with everything that I've got, and it has been incredible.
Yeah.
Whenever I ask the question, where do you see yourself in 5 years? There's always kind of two aspects to it. There's the life aspect, physical things, families, jobs, houses, like physical health, stuff like that. And then there's a spiritual aspect to it. Your relationship with Christ, how you're doing in your walk with Christ. How close are you to God? How strong is your faith? And so people always come with those two different aspects, the physical and the spiritual, whenever they're asked, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Yeah.
I want to talk about today, though, a guy in the Bible that if you asked him, where do you see yourself in 5 years? If he talked physical, he would have been wrong every single time you asked him because his life changed so much. But if you were asking him spiritually speaking, where do you see yourself in 5 years in regards to your relationship with God? He would have been right every single time. The guy I'm talking about, obviously, well, maybe not obvious to everybody, but it's Joseph. We read about him, towards the tail end of the book of Genesis, the very first book of the Bible. And Joseph had an incredibly up and down life, but an incredibly consistent spiritual life.
Yeah. From everything that we can tell, he had a very consistent spiritual life.
Yeah.
Everything that's written about in scriptures, his actions, the way that he speaks to people, everything that he does denotes a love and appreciation and a healthy fear and respect of God.
Exactly. Yeah. We're first introduced to Joseph, Genesis chapter 37. He is the youngest of his brothers, and he's his dad's favorite. He has a dream that all of his brothers' wheat is bowing down to his wheat that they've gathered from the field. Tells his brothers about it as though it's like they're bowing down to him. His brothers don't like that, and so he goes from being his favorite in his dad's household, wearing a coat of many colors, which is a sign of incredible respect and honor, to his brothers ripping that coat off his back, tearing it, pouring goat's blood on it to make it look like he was killed, and then they sold him.
Yeah.
Literally sold him. Their own brother, they sold him. And so, talk about an up and down life.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody in America can say they've had as much of an up and down life as Joseph. So he goes from being sold by his brothers to then sold by the slave traders that bought him from his brothers. Those slave traders then sold Joseph to this man in Egypt, to Potiphar. And Joseph is working in Potiphar's household, and he kind of climbs up through the ranks of the servants in his household. And now all of a sudden we find Joseph in charge of Potiphar's household. So rewind a little bit. When Joseph is growing up, if you asked him 5 years from now, where do you see yourself? He's probably thinking, I'm going to be on my way to, kind of running my dad's household. When my dad starts getting old, I'm going to be in charge of stuff. Yeah. All of a sudden, he's in slavery. If you asked him when he was in slavery, where do you see yourself in 5 years? He might have said, I might be dead,
or still enslaved.
Or still enslaved. He's just completely unsure of what he's expecting. And then all of a sudden he finds himself in charge of Pharaoh's household. And so if you asked him then, where do you see yourself in 5 years? He'd probably say, still working for, I said Pharaoh, didn't I? He's in charge of Potiphar's household. If you asked him then, where do you see yourself in 5 years? He probably would have said, probably still running Potiphar's household, still making everything perfect for his master, for Potiphar. Yeah. Then what happened is Potiphar's wife saw that Joseph was a good-looking man, decided that she wanted to sleep with Joseph. Yeah. But Joseph was a man of God. Yeah. He wanted nothing to do with that, and so he fled. He ran away. She grabbed hold of his cloak, and he essentially just ran out of his clothing as she was trying to grab hold of him.
Yeah.
And so then she framed him, made it look like Joseph was trying to come and take advantage of her rather than the other way around. And so Joseph goes from being the top of Potiphar's household to Potiphar thinking that he's been betrayed by Joseph and putting him into prison.
Yeah.
And so then if you ask Joseph, where do you see yourself in you have to go 10 years at this point because he was in prison for longer than 5 years. But if you ask Joseph, where do you see yourself in 10 years? He's probably thinking like, man, I'm rotting in an Egyptian prison.
Yeah. Well, I think he was in prison for 3. I'll have to go back and read that. I think it was about 3 years.
Okay, I thought it was 7. But we'll have to go back and check. I might be thinking about the famine was 7 good years and then 7 bad years.
Yeah.
But anyways, if you want to go back and check that while I'm talking. Yeah. But yeah, so Joseph is in prison. He encounters 2 men in prison, a cupbearer and a baker, interprets their dreams for him. One of them is put back into his position. One of them loses his life. And then fast forward to the Pharaoh having a dream that he can not understand. And it was the cupbearer, I believe, that remembers Joseph, remembers his interpreting ability by the grace of God. God's the one that's telling Joseph what to say, how to interpret these dreams. And so then he's out of prison. Potiphar then puts him second in command of all of Egypt.
Pharaoh.
Dadgummit, I keep going back and forth on them, don't I? But Pharaoh puts him second in command of all of Egypt. And so Joseph, man, you just talk about a roller coaster of a life. Every time you'd asked him, where do you see yourself in 5 years? He would have been straight up wrong because of all of the changes that happened throughout his life. But if you ask him from a spiritual standpoint, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Yeah.
From what we read of Joseph, I have a feeling he would have said closer to God.
Yeah.
Continually serving God, being a child of his, and he would have been right every single time because that's the life he lived. He was continually serving God. What were you going to say?
So in Genesis 40, we see that it says sometime after this, when he is in prison, it doesn't give a specific amount of time there. But then you go to chapter 41, and it says after 2 whole years, so after he had interpreted the dreams for the cupbearer and the chief baker, after that it had been 2 years. So we're not sure exactly how long, but there was
probably about 2 years because it was after the cupbearer was put back into his place. He did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. End of chapter 40, and I'm reading along with you. Then beginning of 41, after 2 whole years, that's when Pharaoh had his dream. So yeah, he was in prison for 2 years. So yeah, if you ask him every 5 years, where do you see yourself, he would have been wrong. But anyways, yeah, I find that interesting to kind of lay the groundwork for today's discussion. I know I told a very, very long story in order to get to the point that I'm trying to make. But the whole point of the question, where do you see yourself in 5 years, is just that. What do you see? What do you want? What are you expecting in life? And not just physical life, but spiritual life. What are your goals? What are you wanting? And so I was having a Bible study with a couple of our college kids here at Keller a few nights ago. And we're studying through this devotional book. Well, the devotional book that we're reading for our conversation starters. So a little plug for conversation starters. Every Monday we drop a new episode with a little devotional from this devotional book that was written by a bunch of ministers. But anyways, we're studying through that in our college Bible studies as well. And we got to the week on discipline, and the way that discipline is defined in that book is what do you want most now versus what do you want most later. And when those two things differ, then it requires discipline to stay true to what you want most later. Because almost every Christian, I don't know any Christian that would say later, I want to be closer to God. However, in the moment, a lot of things are contrary to that. A lot of things will try to pull you away from that. And it's a matter of what do you want most now versus what you want most later. And that requires discipline. Well, in Joseph's life, he always stayed true to what he wants most as the end goal. And that end goal was to be a faithful servant of his. So he could hear, well done, my good and faithful servant. Come and enter the joy of your master.
Yeah.
So that was what Joseph always kept as his goal, as the thing that he's chasing after.
Yeah.
And he never reached the point where he became satisfied.
Yeah.
And that's sorry, I keep rambling on, but I think that's the thing that we really need to focus on today is not becoming satisfied at any point in our walk with Christ.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important that we set goals.
Yeah.
I think if we go through life just kind of willy-nilly, not planning for anything, not looking to the future for anything, then we're going to be tossed to and fro by the wind, right? And that may happen anyway because life has a way of hitting us and beating us down, and, and then we got to get back up. But I think it's important that we have a plan. I think the patriarchs all throughout history had plans. I think the apostles had plans. Paul went on missionary journeys. Well, he didn't just start walking one day and then turn right and then turn left. I mean, he knew where he was going. He planned where he was going.
Yeah.
So I think it is important that we plan. But I think it's important that we plan according to God's will.
Yep.
And we read about that. I believe it's in James chapter 2. If anyone says, well, today or tomorrow I will go and make a profit, he needs to check himself. Basically, I'm going to go to the verse actually because I know that the scriptures don't say check themselves. But the idea there is that we have to look to the future to see what we're doing. Mm-hmm. Neither of us have children right now, but at some point, Lord willing, I think both of us want children. And if we don't start thinking about now how we're going to raise that child and the things that we're going to teach that child and how our family life is going to be structured and the nightly routine that we're going to have, we don't start thinking about that. That doesn't mean we have to have everything planned out exactly, right? But if we don't start thinking about that stuff, it's going to be really difficult once that child is here to start implementing good stuff, right? And so creating habits, right? Doing all of these things now so that in the future we can have the things that we're wanting, which I think goes to your point, right? Is we want things in the future, right? We want that big house. We want that nice job. We want X, Y, Z in the future. But today we're too busy watching Netflix, or today we're too busy taking a nap on a Saturday afternoon because we woke up at 11 p.m. or 11 a.m. and then 2 p.m. rolls around and we're sleepy again. The
passage you're referencing is James 4:13.
4. That's what it is. Thank you.
Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit.
Yeah.
Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. And that kind of goes into the whole point of what I'll be preaching about when I talk about this topic, but also just for today's episode, today's podcast. It's a matter of making sure that when you say, I want to be here 5 years from now, I see myself doing this for 5 years from now. It's a matter of, is that in relation to your relationship with God, or is that just your desires? Well,
and the scripture itself even says, you're arrogant because you say, I'm going to go and make profit for a year. Yeah. As opposed to, if the Lord wills, I will go here and do that. So it's not saying don't plan. It's not saying don't look to the future. It's not saying don't think about where you're going to be. Yeah. It's saying that God has to be at the forefront of all of your plans. Yeah. God has to be the center of your life, and directing your path and your steps, is either one of the Psalms or Proverbs says.
Yeah. Well, and when he is the center of your life, when things go up and down, when things go on a roller coaster, when we go through a pandemic, when we have the building flood, when we have crazy things happen, but God is your rock, God is the center of all of your goals and all of your desires, then you come out 5 years later and you realize, like, wow, my life is way better off than it was 5 years ago, even though it seems like it's been crazy 5 years,
Yeah.
like the past 5 years.
Yeah.
And so that's the whole point is when God is the center, then no matter what happens in life, whether or not you reach those goals or not, whether or not things seem like they are going good or bad, you can turn back five years later, and if God is your rock, if God is the center of your life, then you can say, I am better off than I was.
Even if not physically, spiritually, you are, right? I mean, Joseph is a prime example of that, you know. Even if he's not physically better off, spiritually, he is closer to God. One of the Proverbs that I think goes really well with this is Proverbs chapter 16, verse 9. It says, the heart of man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps.
Yep.
We are to make plans, and we are to look to the future, and we're to, you know, where are you going to be at 5 years from now? Well, that's a perfectly acceptable question, and it's something that we should be thinking about and something we should be considering. And if we are thinking about that and considering it, it needs to be in the scope and in the light and in the lens of what does God want for me. Yep. And, you know, for those who are in high school, you know, God really doesn't care where you go to college. God cares what you do when you're at college. Yep. God doesn't really care what job you have as long as it's not a sinful job, right? But God wants you to serve him wherever you're at. Yep. You know, God doesn't care where you live, what city. God cares what you do, where you're planted. Exactly. And so it's really important that we understand that God really doesn't care about so many of the things that we may care about. Yeah. God cares about the more important things. What are we doing with our time? What are we doing with our life? How are we influencing, serving people in his name? And so, you know, I really like the question of, you know, where are you going to be in 5 years? I think it's such an important question. You know, the first time I heard it was actually in high school. My principal, Dr. Hollingsworth, had this thing that he would go around. What's your 5-year plan? He'd ask the freshmen, he'd ask the sophomores, he'd ask the juniors, seniors, he'd ask everybody, what's your 5-year plan? Everybody at that point was like, dude, I don't know.
They're like, I hope I have a diploma by then.
Like, I don't even know what class I'm going to next. Like, I gotta look, you know. Yeah. And but the reality is that's such a good question, and it's an important one because we do need to be planning where we're going to be, and even if it doesn't work out that way, that's okay. Yep. Because we've got God.
Yep. Yeah, and that's the whole point is regardless of your own plans, whether they work out or they may not work out, that's going to be fine either way. Yeah. The most important thing, though, is that you have God. Yes. If your plans end up working out for you, but you don't have God, that's a loss. Yeah. If your plans don't work out for you and you do have God, that's a win. So that's kind of the whole point of where do you see yourself in 5 years? Yeah. The physical things don't matter nearly as much as the spiritual things. Yeah. So, all right. Well, that's all I've got. I know this is going to be a little bit shorter conversation, but I think it's a pretty simple one. Yeah. You know?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. And, you know, I'll let you close us out here in a second, but I do think that, you know, look into the scriptures and looking at how the people in the scriptures planned out their lives in order to serve God is important. You know, Hannah planned for Samuel to serve his entire life.
Yep. And she said, for this child I have prayed, which, speaking of, so I always wear this cross necklace around my neck. Yeah. I've got 3 things that are on this necklace. Obviously a cross, here, number 1. Yeah. Then the other thing is a Texas quarter that, you know, on quarters, they always put states on them, or at least they used to. I don't know if they do that anymore. But it's a quarter with the state of Texas. Somebody punched out the middle of the quarter so it could turn into like a ring, and I put on my necklace, cause I'm a Texan through and through. But this last little thing I've got on my necklace here, it says, for this child I have prayed. And my parents gave that to me when I went off to college. Reference to Hannah. Yeah. When she had Samuel, and she said, for this child I have prayed. Yeah. And I don't remember why you brought that up, but it made me think of this, and it just reminded me that it's a matter of keeping God first in your life, praying to him for all things. Yeah. Keeping him your number one line of communication. Yeah. Working all of your plans through him to make sure they glorify him, and do things to glorify him, not to glorify yourself. Yeah. So. Well, and the third thing that you said there was the reason that I brought it up was making sure that
we are putting all of our plans through God, and really that we are planning. Just there's a saying that I've heard and I've used quite often is, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. And I think that we need to know where we're going. Yeah. We're going to heaven. If we're going to heaven,
only one road will take you
there. One road that'll take us there.
Yeah.
And that's God's path. That's God's will. That's God's plan. So
anyway,
that's all I've got. So I'll let you close this out.
Alrighty. Well, we appreciate y'all faithfully listening to us for nearly 2 years now. This has been a fun ride, and I'm looking forward to the next 2 years. I think it was about 2 months ago when we hit a major milestone of 10,000 downloads. The growth that we've seen from this podcast. I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, we've reached over 70 different countries.
I actually looked it up. I think we're at like 54 or 56.
50, mid 50s in the countries, over 1,300 different cities, all 6 continents, because Antarctica doesn't count.
Correct. So we're at 54 total countries.
So much growth that we've seen through this podcast that we've done. We appreciate y'all's support so much. We appreciate the encouragement, and so we just ask that it keeps coming. Don't forget to reach out to us and let us know your thoughts and your comments on these episodes. And if you have requests for any other episodes, feel free to reach out to us. So we appreciate y'all, and you can just stick around and listen to how you can contact us if you so desire.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Bible Conversations. We want to encourage you to check out our proud partners in Ministry League. They have a website as well as an app that you can download from your smartphone.
Yeah, not only that, but also be sure to send us an email. You can reach us at kcocbibleconversations@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you, what your thoughts and comments are on today's episode.
And if you have any questions or any comments, anything that you would like to let us know, please send us a text at the following number, 972-905-0856.
Yeah, and that way we'll be able to get that comment and get back with y'all as well. And please leave reviews and comments. I know there's a lot of places that you listen to this podcast that you can leave comments and reviews. I know Apple Podcasts, I'm pretty sure iHeartRadio and others, you can leave reviews and comments as well.
And last, but most certainly not least, we ask that you share this with your friends. We do our best to provide biblical and strong discussion, and we hope that you can feel free to share that with everybody that you love and come in contact with. Thank you all so much for all of your support. We love you.